government debt is just future taxation, right? It's just resources that they have spent, created a debt, and will now need to steal from people in the future to pay for, right? Either via taxation or inflation. We already have Japan at 250% plus debt to GDP. They're kind of the canary in the coal mine. I think you mentioned earlier we're at 130%, maybe slightly above that. These are like end of empire numbers, as we have obviously touched on up until this point. What's happening? Like where are we? People often say, what inning are we in? Like, how do you see this playing out? Are we just going to keep marching forward into this increasing debt to GDP until currencies start to hyperinflate and societies start to fail? Are people going to, you also mentioned some people are figuring this out already. They're moving over towards Bitcoin in certain capacities. I guess the optimistic view would be we could have some type of smooth transition or a smoother transition than just outright hyperinflation and social disintegration. Like, how do you see the future unfolding now that we're at or near kind of this end game of the central banking paradigm?
Yeah, and there's no doubt that we are in the final innings of fiat currency experiment. The currency life cycle is coming to its end. And we see that in the Dalio theory. We see that in all the precedent in history that we've seen. But in my studies, one thing I found is you cannot mathematically define hyperinflation. Like the textbooks would like to say, 50% inflation per month, you're hyperinflation.
Yeah.
But
Mises would say you can't even mathematically define inflation, actually. Like, it's as subjective as value itself. Like, we can choose whatever baskets of goods we want to say are essential and track their price changes, but it's ultimately subjective to the buyer.
I absolutely agree with that because it's based on trust.
Yeah.
And as long as that buyer, as long as that consumer is still trusting the system, then they can continue to kick the road.
Right.
Now the status quo will start shifting faster and faster, and that's what we've seen since 2020. Since 2020, the rate of inflation has gone up significantly. They've done a really good job of manipulating numbers to keep the long-term inflation rate at around 4%. If you look at global liquidity, it's closer to 7%. But people don't understand that. So there's a disconnect there because they still trust. So if they abuse too much and people lose trust, you hyperinflate overnight. So there is no mathematical point. I couldn't agree more with that. There's no mathematical point. It's the psychological point.
That's right.
Where people get bent so much that they just completely give up and lose trust.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that there is an optimistic scenario. There is a chance because it's not solely based on mathematics. We can have the 34 trillion of debt, the 220 trillion, and just these numbers, they don't make sense. But we can have that and still have an optimal and an optimistic outcome because we can rebuild trust. And I think if you take Bitcoin and you put it on the asset side of your balance sheet, you are now rebuilding trust. And there's no better way to demonstrate that than what we've seen in El Salvador. El Salvador has put Bitcoin on the asset side of their balance sheet. They didn't even do Bitcoin bonds, which I was really eager to kind of see how they were going to do that. I think they hit a few snags because, it does not make sense to issue Bitcoin denominated debt, right? Because it's the same.
Hard to
for the
do that.
same reason it makes sense to issue inflationary debt.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense to issue deflationary debt. You can bankrupt yourself.
Yeah.
So I was interested in seeing how they were going to do that. That played a role in our solution at People's Reserve. But putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet forced the banks and credit rating agencies to increase the credit score. Now, you would think a country that adopted Bitcoin would never get a loan from the IMF, ever. Now, of course, the IMF kind of showed their cards and is forcing El Salvador to make changes to their Bitcoin policies to get the money. But the only reason they're really giving them the money is, number one, they get to make the stipulations against Bitcoin. But it's hard to deny their creditability because their credit rating has gone up because the asset side of their balance sheet, the growth in that has outpaced liabilities. So it's just like us. If we get a new job and you go from making $60,000 a year to $180,000 a year, your credit score is going to go up. Because the asset side of your balance sheet is going to grow faster than your liabilities.
Yeah, your net book value has increased.
We can do that with Bitcoin, and that's what can grow the trust. So you can look at it glass half full, glass half empty. I'm looking at it glass half full because I think that we still have a chance we still have, especially with Elon and Doge and the current administration, getting all of the waste, fraud, and abuse out of the liability side. How much of this deficit is actually waste, fraud, and I don't like the word abuse. Let's use the word theft. How much is waste, fraud, and theft?
Well, theft is 100%.
If we could, if we can get rid of the waste, if we can just limit our liabilities and turn it's like a kleptocracy, right? It's just who can. If you're going to the piggy bank, I'll say that's okay as long as you let me go to the piggy bank too.
Right.
So we need to get rid of, if we can get rid of that and kind of limit our liabilities, at the same time add Bitcoin to the balance sheet and watch our assets grow. Well, think of it on a personal level. If you start cutting your spending and making more money, then creditors are gonna trust you more. So I think there's a unique window we have here. As the Overton window is shifting, we have the opportunity to rebuild trust. Let's hope that this current bounce in trust is not just a bounce and a return to the downtrend, but is actually a bottoming process. And from this point forward, we could rebuild trust. And if we can do that, I think that optimistic scenario has a very high percentage chance of playing out as we transition from circulating credit to commodity credit.
It's fantastic. Just like I've thought about this recently, that there's actually a connection, an etymological link between the words trust and truth. They both are derived from a word that means something like solid, steadfast, unshakable, right? And you could think that the one thing people will always trust is the truth, actually, right? It's the one thing trust cannot be broken in. And so it's funny that you keep talking about rebuilding trust, and there's also all of this descriptive language around Bitcoin as truth, right? Like it's an indisputable ledger. You can't really argue against it. Truth has also been defined as like radical disclosure or radical unconcealedness, I think as Heidegger called it. And Bitcoin is that, right? It's this open source software. Nothing can be hidden. It's like a language in which lies cannot be told sort of thing. And it has all these very powerful truth elements. And then it's also very useful at rebuilding trust, as you're describing, in broader social systems. So it's just fascinating to see that connection. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.